Sounds good.
We're gonna start. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. This is a CivicLex and Student Organizations and Activities discussion with Hannah LeGris of District 3. I'm Chris CRC with Student Orgs and Activities. And Megan, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, you're on mute.
Hey everybody, my name is Megan Gullah. I'm the Director of Programs at CivicLex. I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks, Megan. I guess we could just dive right in, and Hannah and Sally, would you all mind introducing yourselves? And maybe explain a little bit about like what your positions are and like what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, okay, excellent. Thank you all for the opportunity to come and talk and to share information. And just so people know, if they have follow-up questions, they can be in touch with us via email too. My name is Hannah LeGris. I am the 3rd District Council Representative for Lexington Fayette Urban County Government. And the position is technically a part-time position, but you asked about the day-to-day work. It can really vary. So the 3rd District Council member, I think, is a pretty busy council representative. We receive a lot of emails. We have many meetings that we go to for our council work. And we also have constituent relationships and pieces of legislation that we work on pretty continuously. So the way that you do the work can vary in that you can do it at different times of the day, but there'll always be something new that's happening. Sally has been in the 3rd District Council office for 7 years. So I'll let her introduce herself, and then we can get down into more specific answers and discussion about our district and about the positions.
I'm Sally Lambert-Warfield. I'm the legislative aide for the council member of the 3rd District, and I have been for a little over 7 years now. I've been through 4 different council members. Diane Lawless was my first one. Jake Gibbs was the second. Mark Swanson is the third, and now Hannah is the 4th. And my job is, this is going to sound flippant, but it's completely honest. It's whatever my council member says it is at the time. And so it changes from council member to council member. You know, Diane was very office oriented, and she wanted me there in a primarily customer service role. And then when it flipped over to Jake knew everybody in the 3rd District. So me answering questions was not as big of a deal, but me doing like legislative research was a huge deal. And so it changes with the needs of the council district. But I have done and can do anything from flat out customer service to communications, writing letters, producing a newsletter, doing legislative research, doing issue research, really just runs the gamut. So whatever Hannah needs, that's what I'm there for.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Sally. I didn't realize like how different each legislative aide's position was depending on who the council member is at that time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Hannah, then we go to Sally. Maybe you could talk about how and why you got involved in politics in local government.
Okay. And I was thinking about this as Sally was answering. The council members on the district level, it's a 2-year term. So when you're running for office, you're running for a 2-year position, right? So that's one of the reasons why Sally has worked with so many people within 7 years. So when I started thinking about public service, a friend of mine brought up the idea to me, honestly, and I had never considered running for office. I knew, and Chris, you and I have talked about this, I knew that I loved working with students and getting them connected to our community. I'm currently a career counselor in the Lewis Honors College, and I've taught service learning and civic engagement, and I've worked in admissions, and a big part of my personal, I guess, drive as a professional is to get young people connected to our community. So I knew I loved that. And I when this friend of mine said, you know, have you thought about running for office? I thought, I should talk to our current third district council member at that time, who was Jake Gibbs. And something that was really remarkable about Jake is that he was so accessible. And I said, can we have lunch? And will you just tell me about what a council member does? I mean, I really had never had a conversation like what we're having here today. Like, what does it look like on a day-to-day basis? And Jake was retired at the time when I spoke with him, and he did council. So council was his main focus professionally. And he did talk about Sally. And so, he said, well, it's really interesting work. You get to meet so many different people. You get to make a positive impact in the community and work on issues that are important to you. He also said something like, I get up for a while, I read, I check to see who's president. He checks on at the time Trump was president, he wasn't too keen on that. So he said, Sally sends some emails on to me, we have some meetings, there are all kinds of smart people who work in city government. And he said, I think you'd really like it. And I said, okay. So I started to learn more about the position from talking to Jake. And then I talked to some other people who had served as council members, and they were very encouraging. And I thought, this is a really good way, I hope, to translate some of my values into practice beyond the classroom, and in addition to working with my students. And so that was my primary motivation. And I think that if you decide to run for office, you have to say, this project in and of itself, running for office, is worthy, no matter what the outcome. So I just say to myself, I might win, I might not. That's not what it's about, right? Yes, you want to win. That's a great outcome, but you have to be okay with the whole process, because you will learn so much about your community, about managing people, about, just the inner workings of a campaign. So that's kind of I want people to remember that, because you're going to gain something no matter what if you run for office. It may not be that office, but I think it's worth your time if you allow it to be that way. So.
Thanks, Anna. How about you, Sally?
That's a really interesting question for a legislative aide. A lot of us get into this process by working on a campaign. And I did not come in on a campaign. I have my whole career either worked in government or nonprofit. So I've always been a very public service sector oriented worker. And my background was actually in nonprofit communications, where you do a lot of customer service type things, you craft communications, sometimes it's fund development communications, but it's all about the uplift, and trying to share your organization, your positions, and it's a different kind of communications that I feel like translates really well to government work, And so it just so happened that Diane Lawless was looking for a legislative aide. And one of the council members at that time had worked with me when I worked at Girl Scouts. She was in charge of research and development, and I was in charge of communications. And she said, who would be a really good fit? So in that instance, it was very much like the position wasn't advertised, and she knew about my work in nonprofit, and that's how I got into the role. And when I got into the role, I'm not going to lie, I'm not even going to play. It was terrifying. And you see a lot of legislative aides have that reaction. A lot of people will be like, I was absolutely scared to death, because there is no training manual. There is no training, not for your council member, not for your aide. You have to start from scratch, learning an entire system, this huge system of governance. And then in order to do your job, you have to learn all the processes within that system. And there's nobody to hold your hand. You just jump in and you get it done. And so that's kind of how I got into it and kind of how I got started. And thankfully, I love a challenge. because I would have jumped out of there pretty quick if I didn't. But it's a very worthwhile role, and I would love to keep doing it for as long as I can.
Thanks for sharing that, Sally. I feel like a lot of students, I know myself, when I finished undergrad and later graduate school going into a new position, I was terrified to start a new role. So I really appreciated that honesty there. Hannah, I was wondering if you could talk about some of the issues that are important to District 3.
Well, and Sally and I may be able to tag team this question. I think I'm going to answer in a really district specific way. There are going to be issues that are citywide that may come up in our conversation today, but thinking about our district, I think town-gown relationships and the relationship of the University of Kentucky and the students and kind of rental properties and the campus itself to the city. So the third district, I'm not sure if everyone on here knows, includes the University of Kentucky. And so that's one big issue. And so we have a lot of near campus neighborhoods who approach us and talk to us about just the feel of their neighborhood due to or in relation to the student population. And then people also bring up similar issues to us when it comes to the spread of campus, campus and the new buildings kind of encroaching on existing neighborhoods, people who have lived for 30 years next to the University of Kentucky, their neighborhoods have changed radically. And so Sally and I spent a lot of time with constituent relationships trying to figure out what we can do to build more positive interactions between students at the University of Kentucky and residents close to campus. So that's one major issue that I've learned is pretty big here in the district. Number two, we do get a lot of questions about, I would say, environmental issues and about stormwater mitigation. A lot of our residents who live along Nicholasville Road, as you're going out of town, on the right-hand side, that's our district as well. So people who live on that side of Nicholasville, we hear a lot from them about stormwater and just how can we help their neighborhood have a higher quality of life. Nicholasville Road has its own challenges in that, a lot of people want to and do walk and bike and use public transit, but that road doesn't always feel safe or accessible. So we spent a lot of time talking to people about those issues as well and trying to figure out what kinds of solutions are not possible. Sally, is there anything you would add on? Downtown, I guess, is another big thing.
Yeah, I think that it's worth mentioning that I think that one thing that people think about when they think about governance is that we are constantly out there tackling like these big picture issues. Like we're constantly trying to get our heads around like climate change and hunger and poverty. And the reality is that most of our work, while it incorporates elements of those, right, is on a much smaller scale, and it's on a personal scale. And that our bulk of our work really is, like Hannah was saying, about quality of life issues. And when we tackle those bigger picture issues, for example, I just had an email conversation with a person this week where we were talking about climate change. You're never going to see council attack climate change as this huge issue. What we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about multimodal transportation. We're going to talk about green space. We're going to talk about green infrastructure. We're going to talk about these things that are tangible on a local level, because that's kind of the scope that we've got to work in, And so that's what I would say. I would say that once you hit at large, sometimes you tackle a little bit more of those higher level issues, but on the district level, it's very much, I can't sleep at night because there's too much noise, or, my basement flooded again. Why is there stormwater in my basement? And, you know, I'm concerned about hunger. How are we going to deal with food insecurity in a population? And so bringing it down to that granular level in your thinking is one way to kind of appreciate what it is that we do.
Exactly. And a lot of it is relational,
Yeah.
right? And Sally has so much knowledge and background. It's incredibly helpful to me as we are assisting people in navigating the system of governance, right? If people have an issue that they can't find a solution for, maybe, you know, they might come to us and then we might say, well, there are these other areas where, you know, we need to help you so that you get the resources you need. I've learned about so many programs that are positive and community oriented within LFUCG. And, you know, sometimes there's so many things that people don't know about that hopefully, ideally, we get to help share and spread some of that information so that people who need assistance get assistance. People who are confused by the system get support as they're moving through it too.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Eric asked in the chat, Hannah, what was the biggest learning curve you faced after joining council?
Well, you know, thank you for that question, Eric. It's only been about a month and a half. We're moving into 2 months. So I think that there are, and Sally touched upon this, I think there are several learning curves. One is just, as Sally mentioned, you get elected, which is amazing. And it's like, whoa, you've been working for a year, maybe more to get this position, right? And then it's like, okay, go ahead. And and I feel so fortunate to have an aide who has so much experience, because there were issues that I brought with me on my campaign trail. I was like, these are the issues, you know, that are really important. So I've been hearing about, and that's all well and good, but there are going to be some immediate concerns, right? That you have to pick up, you have to carry through into your role within the district, that maybe the previous council member, they've been working on that, you know, particular issue with a set of constituents. You know, you need to get a lot of background information, you know, and there are things like you're on these standing committees and that, you know, an issue gets put into committee. Sometimes there's a subcommittee of that committee. They maybe work on a particular set of issues. Then it goes back into committee. Those, you know, there's all this research that happens behind the scenes and presentations. Those committee members have to vote to get the item back out into the larger council. Then all of those folks have to vote. You know, there are all these different ways like the information moves, and that's a pretty steep learning curve, because you're learning LFUCG, and some people come in, they've already worked within government, they know some people, they understand how it works. But for me, I needed to learn that system. And honestly, and Chris, I told you this, like working at the University of Kentucky, a large system like that has been very, very helpful to me working within government in Lexington. So that's one learning curve. How does everything work? How does information flow? Who do you need to talk to about what? And then there's the other learning curve, and that's people. Understanding everyone that you're working with, understanding power dynamics, understanding the commissioners who represent, you know, certain divisions and their role, understanding the history, and, you know, figuring out like, how do you get votes? How do you get support? It's not always because someone automatically supports whatever you're putting out. Sometimes it's interpersonal, or sometimes they don't support someone else who doesn't support. So then they're supporting you for those reasons. So that's interesting. You know, you have to get on the phone. I heard one of my students give, you know, some advice about this in an internship. You have to be comfortable with getting on the phone and calling potentially a bunch of strangers who you're now in a governing body with, and just try and understand them, right? And so that's another learning curve. Sally, is there anything you want to add to that from what you've seen from your position?
No, I will add that you've done a fantastic job with it. And I think that, no, I'm serious. It's that is a really great response for 1 month in the actual seat. Because you're right, there are all those different things that come at you from all those different angles. And I want to say that this group of new legislators has it even harder, because every legislative body, God bless them, that the city council votes in right in budget. Every year we pass a budget, the budget is this thick.
Literally. It's a
Like,
book.
it is. You could knock somebody out with a thing if you hit them upside the head. It's that big. And you have to, come up to speed so that you can have these incredibly important discussions about what is city financing, how are they financing it, and so on top of that, we're in an actual fiscal crisis right now as a nation, and a less degree as a city. We've actually done okay, but still it's out there. We've got a pandemic. All right. We've got all these other things that you're like, well, I would like to talk about composting. And it's like, well, actually,
We
there's
do want to talk about composting. Yes.
we'll talk about composting, but at the same time, there's so much going on that I feel like as a freshman incoming council, you guys just, you came in at a rough time, but you're doing a great job with all of those things.
May I add a piece of advice to this that at least I internalized that may be helpful to anyone who's considering running or if they get into office? This is a piece of advice. And this, I think, Chris, speaks to what you mentioned before about starting a new job. I think you have to say, look, a lot of these people who come into office are big strivers, very high achieving, pretty intense people. I mean, in order to run for office, put yourself out there, do all the things you have to do. Raise money, talk to all these strangers. I think you have to say when you enter into office, or at least I did, I have to say, you know what, I'm not going to be perfect at this. There's going to be so much that I have to learn. I'm not going to come in assuming I'm automatically going to be good. Just because you have won an election, you've had other career success, you've gone to school, all these things. I think that in order for me to enter in, I had to say, okay, I'm not going to be great at this, but what I am going to be is really, really open to learning, right? And that's not a personal affront that I have to learn. It's part of getting better. It's part of getting good at the role, And so if I view this as something I've got to learn more about in order to engage in a successful way, that was a really helpful framework for me. And it's something that I try to work on every day. And other council members may share this advice who are more seasoned, and they did with me. Before you evaluate yourself, give yourself 6 months. And I know on a 2-year term, honestly, it's yikes, that's a big chunk of it. But if you look back over those 6 months, you're gonna see that you have learned a lot, and hopefully that you've gotten better. And you wanna come in humble and not presumptuous. And I think that's going to help, because there's so many people within government who have so much knowledge. And if you treat them that way, right, as professionals who've been working in this field for a long time, which many of them have as government employees, then I think that you're gonna get a lot further. Right? Because just like at UK, if you want information, you just have to ask a lot of people, and you're going to find someone who will give it to you, but it's easier if you're nice.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I read once that it takes about 6 months to learn a new position. So I think that's great advice. I do have a question though, Hannah. How do you balance working at the University of Kentucky and being a council member?
Well, currently for this semester, which is my first semester on the job with council, I have been very fortunate because my college has been really supportive at UK, the Honors College, and I went down to 30 hours at UK. And in some ways, and Sally mentioned how we're hindered by the pandemic. In some ways, we are helped by the pandemic in that, to do all these meetings that we have to do, even on my days where I focus on council, which are Tuesdays and Thursdays, I have more of a council focus. We don't have to spend travel time. We can be in a meeting, right? And that's what you're doing. You're not biking to the meeting, walking, driving, however you're getting there, and getting settled. And then, it's an hour and a half meeting, and then someone's talking to you for a while afterwards. You miss out on some good stuff with that chit chat, but you also have more time to work. that's the other thing with the pandemic. You know, when I think about the role of council, it's not just the role of like getting all the work done, all the behind the scenes work, which was what Sally and I are kind of talking about. It's also like telling the story of what you're doing, which I think can be hard because you're so busy working and getting stuff done that you have to be telling the story of what you're doing. And also in a typical scenario, you would be getting invited to a lot of events, you need to be out and about, showing face, talking to people in groups, you know, maybe giving presentations. So that is something that I think for people's personal lives can be hard to balance depending on how you want to spend your time. So I think that with council, typically, you know, I think I'd still be able to balance UK and council, but I would have to say every night after whatever position I'm working on, like I'm probably going to neighborhood meetings, I'm going to fundraisers. So we're in a different kind of workflow right now. And so we'll see how that all goes. But my college has been very supportive, and my work with students and the conversations I have there has balanced the work that I do on council in a positive way. So
Thank you for sharing. Megan had a great question in terms of fundraising for your campaign. If you could talk about that experience, did you have any experience with fundraising before? And what advice would you give anyone who's interested for running for office but might be deterred?
By the money part, the raising the
Yeah.
money. No, Chris and Megan, I did not have experience fundraising, but I did have experience with building relationships, which is a huge part of fundraising. And I have experience reframing things. So, okay, here, say a friend of yours writes you an email and they say, I'm gonna run for local office. Maybe you knew them in college, maybe you live far away, right? And they're like, hey, an update, I'm running for office. You know, I'm just trying to get some seed money, right? Would you, maybe you've never given a political campaign, but you know your friend. And someone's like, will you give $10, right? Sure. That's like if you went out and you bought someone a coffee or a beer or something, and you're like, I'm buying, it's on me. That's $10, right? And so I started with that perspective. As soon as I knew I was running, I reached out to people who were leaders in the community because I knew I would need endorsements. And I wanted to tell people, I knew it'd be a really competitive race, and I wanted to tell people I'm running, and it would mean a lot to me to have your support. Can we talk more about it? That's one thing. So you start to put it out there. You need this thing called momentum. So you want to get people excited, right? And the fundraising can be part of that. And for me, it was helpful. There are people who typically give to campaigns, and you'll get to know some of them. But the way I thought about it was like any $5, any $10, any $50 that I was getting, that was amazing to me, right? And I wrote a thank you note to every single person I possibly could. There may have been someone like an aunt of mine who I called or something. So, you know, like, and when I didn't have any stationery was one of the very first things I bought when I got any money. And I had a great designer who I met in a coffee shop. She overheard me talking about maybe running for office, and she was like, I hear you. Like, I design things. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, I knew I needed a designer, campaign manager, but I knew I really, really needed money, because to win, you need money. But you have to say, this person would buy me a coffee. Maybe they'll give some money to my campaign. And then you thank them. And I think getting people involved who don't think of themselves as donors to campaigns, that can be really powerful because they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. If someone would have approached me who I knew and they were like, I'm doing this, will you give $10? I would definitely do it. You know, or even $5. And with the kickoff, I think you should, if you can have a kickoff party. It doesn't have to be that expensive. Use your network. People you know, people who are creative, they can help you put together an event. You know, I think it's helpful if you invite people who don't think of themselves as political people, right? And you're just doing this cool thing. Like, you're doing a cool thing, you want them to be part of it. And if people feel part of something, they're more likely to give, and they're more likely to talk about it and to show up for you in different ways. Everybody has different talents. Some people have time, money. Some people are like really, really like busy people. Maybe you know some friends who are really busy and they don't have a project right now. okay, well, how can they help you with this project, even if they've never done a campaign before? So I think thinking about fundraising in those terms and just expressing thanks, making sure that anyone you call, you know, that you have had some kind of interaction with, as much as you can express appreciation, that goes a long way. And you know what? I gave to some other campaigns as an experiment. I mean, yeah, I supported them, but I wanted to see what they would do, right? I gave, you know, some people, it was like like say $20, right? And I gave it across a handful of campaigns. And one of the people who I gave to immediately hand wrote me a postcard. I was like, wow. And the other people, you know, some that I didn't hear from some of them at all. I don't have to, but I realized how it felt to get that postcard. I felt more connected to that person. I was like, I've never met this person, but I would give again. And that person was smart. Halfway through their campaign, after the primary, and they got through the primary, they wrote me another postcard. That postcard probably took a minute and a half to write, but it meant a lot to me. And it made me feel like, okay, yes, like I'm part of something and this person appreciates it. So that's kind of my advice about fundraising. Everybody has there are people who've raised way more money than me, but I just think you use your skills and your talents and your relationships, and you want people, you got to be the number one true believer, right?
Yeah.
And then other people are like able to get on board. You have to be like, yeah, you want to be in on this.
And I think that's great advice, and especially of personalizing. You know, the note cards is so important to like reach out to people to personally thank them yourself. People are more likely to donate again because of that. And every dollar counts. I work on the board of Bluegrass Ambucks, local nonprofit, and we talk about that all the time. Every dollar counts.
Mm-hmm. And I had a treasurer, very important role. And I had a fundraising director. And the fundraising director, he was really good at keeping me. You won't always want to make those phone calls, even as people you know, you're like, oh, it's me again calling, you know. So it's nice to have someone on your team who sits down with you and they're like, we're going to make a plan. Here are the 50 people that you really need to touch base with. I will be holding you accountable. That fundraising director, maybe they make some of those calls, or maybe they just like help you with a plan, but that can be really nice. So you don't feel like you're creating all the structure for fundraising on your own. But
Yeah.
You're right, every dollar.
Braden just dropped in the box. He's getting AOC vibes. Megan had another great question, which Chase really likes as well. And that's, you know, now that you're in office, do you think council could do a better job at informing residents about the work it's doing? And then maybe Sally, if you want to add to that, somebody who's been in your position for a while, how do you perceive that as well?
Well, Sally and I talk about this quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
And it's something I thought about a lot coming into office. I think when you're running a campaign, there are various ways that you connect with people, you know, and this year we were forced to do a lot of social media. And I think when I first got into this role, I was like, okay, we're going to do all of that and we're going to keep doing all of that. It's a lot to like do the job and do it really well. And then also be broadcasting it in a professional way, you know, that works for you as a person. I think that we could probably do more to tell the story. I think conversations like this are really helpful, actually, because we're talking about some of the behind the scenes work. But we do have a newsletter. And, you know, what do you think, Sally, about all of this?
I think that, so first I'm going to point out an obstacle. And that is that over the decades, public participation from individuals in civic groups has dropped tremendously. And I feel like that was a really important, in retrospect, that was probably a really important aspect to bridge the gap of government communications with individual parties. Because now with that kind of missing middle, it is very much on each individual to be connected with the government and following the government. And it's on the government to kind of be able to understand what the information is that the residents are looking for. Like every time that we put out a newsletter, we're selecting from any number of different things that we could put in that newsletter that we're just hoping to God you connect with, right? Like we're hoping this is what's important information and we're not missing anything that is going to turn out to be really important information down the line. And then just the amount of individualized chatter in terms of our news feeds, in terms of television, in terms of radio, in terms of all of that, we've kind of like back-brained a little bit because I don't listen to the radio. You know, I don't watch TV. I haven't had cable in ages. You know, the information that I get, I filter very heavily. And I feel like that when we do our best work, Hannah's right, it's in situations like this, when we're talking directly to people, face to face to people, or we're talking directly to people who can then go to talk to other people, like neighborhood associations are really important ways of us getting that information out there. But if people don't want to civically engage, if they don't have the time to civically engage in their neighborhood association or whatever other entity it is, we're kind of missing a step where we're not understanding what you might want to hear and you're not hearing what it is that we're putting out there. And it's just tough. Like Hannah says, we talk about this all the time. How can we get quality information to people when they want it, you know, what they need, really good factual stuff. And that's the other thing, really good factual stuff is super boring. Like, wow, open the budget book sometime. It is super boring. But man, it's just so important. And I don't know that I have a great answer for that other than we need individuals to connect more upwards and so that we can learn what it is that you want to hear from us and how you want to hear it.
It's fantastic. Thank you all for sharing. Megan and Eric asked, like, what was the process of like building your team, Hannah? And like, did you find any challenges with that? Campaign, more specifically.
Campaign team, yes. Yeah, in our office, it's a team of two, Sally and myself, and luckily she's amazing and was already there. So that's a more direct question. So yes, the campaign team. So as I mentioned, Councilmember Gibbs had talked to me a little bit about the role. And, you know, I knew I needed a campaign manager. I think that number one, when you're building a team, you need to be pretty self-aware. Like you need to know your strengths and what you're going to do on your own. And then you need some people who can fill in the gaps. Yeah. So I knew that I could write well. I knew that I liked people and I knew that I could hustle and I knew that I could learn about the issues. But I knew that I did not want to do social media. I knew that I had never done a Facebook Live video. I knew that I did not have an Instagram. And I knew I needed some people who had policy and, you know, kind of city background that I did not have. So I think it's good to take a good hard look at yourself and be like, where are my deficits? I should probably build a team in relation to that. And for me, I had talked to Councilmember Gibbs about, to Jake about his campaign manager. And he was like, yo, Jason's great. You know, call him up. I felt really anxious about finding a campaign manager because I didn't have any money at the time either. And I needed some people who were willing to work really hard because I knew it would be a ton of work. And so I started with talking to this campaign manager and I talked to a couple of other people as well. And I was like, this guy is intense and like pretty brusque and has some pushy energy, but I am good with that. You know, because I also have a pretty strong, you know, personality. And I was like, this guy's going to push me. He's into social media. He wants to build a website. You know, he has all these relationships from doing past campaigns that I don't have. He like has this guy who does signs. He has this guy who prints stuff. You know, he had some stuff going on that was really good for me. I started with him and with the treasurer, and the treasurer used to be my lawyer. I knew I needed someone who was really reliable, really by the books, will get it done. I wouldn't ever have to think about that treasurer stuff, except for, raising the money. And, and then I started talking to people. Like I was like, hey, I'm trying to build a team. I'm putting it out there. I knew someone who'd worked on a campaign before. She was like, hey, I've got this great guy that I know. Maybe he would do finance stuff with you. That, like I said, with the designer, I said, I was blabbering on about it in a quiet coffee shop. She put a piece of notebook paper on my table. The minute I knew I was running, I called her. And I was like, let's talk. I knew I needed someone. We wanted to look good and feel cool, because I wanted more people to like get into it. And so, then Jason, my campaign manager, he knew a photographer, right? And so it was started kind of like building. But then there were things where we realized like, oh, wow, we're gonna need to run a field campaign. And there was someone who reached out to us who liked what we were doing. And she was like, I have background, I work for the McGrath campaign. I'll work for you. We started building in more positions. There are things that I wish I wish that I would have had more diversity on my team. I wish that I would have asked more people earlier to be on my team. I asked a lot of event managing people if they would join in, but then we didn't put on a lot of events. So then, we needed some people who were volunteer managers in a different way. So I think there's some people I would have asked earlier. And I think that's the big part. Like, here's the thing. Anybody who's gone through a traumatic experience or something pretty challenging, I think, has thought about this. There are all these people who are going to show up for you. And on my team, a bunch of them were strangers. The people I had never met before, people I was just acquainted with. And they were awesome. And they like knocked it out of the park. And it was just like really, it was cool. There are some of my friends who this just wasn't their thing. That's okay. Like, I think you have to be okay with like, however anybody can show up for you at that time in their life, that's great. But I wouldn't expect everyone in your social network to show up, right? But there are going to be some awesome people who you didn't even know, like, would be able to buy in, who will come and they will like put in so much work. And there are some people who are like, I don't want to make any phone calls, but they will walk around for like 10 hours at a time and they will hang doors, and some of that is just like, you have to appreciate them for what they can do and be like, you're part of something and it's big and I'm appreciative that you decided to use your time this way, because a lot of them will not get paid. But it's like exciting and cool to be part of something that's different. So that's the, I could list all the different, people we had on the team, but some of the challenges, like I had a social overlap with several of the other candidates, that can slim down your pickings. But I would also think about people who aren't on your team as on your team. Like if you have a neighbor who talks to everyone, like keep them in the loop. Like if they're into your campaign, like they're part of your team. Like you can be like, hey, I know I was talking about the campaign. Can you tell 5 other people about it? I mean, that's, those 5 people, 10 people at a time, people who talk positively, that can go a long way to like your team and to your win. So.
Thanks, Anna. Megan has another great question, and that's, why is it important for students to be civically engaged, and what happens when people are? And then also, could you maybe talk a little bit about how exactly can students and residents of District 3 get involved in their community and make change?
It's important to be civically engaged because you get to help by understanding how your city works and by understanding the range of experiences within it. You get to help ideally shape the city in a positive way. The more information you have about how things work, and accurate information, the more you can help others engage and share that information so that more people feel empowered to connect with their representatives, to start nonprofit organizations, to volunteer, to talk to their neighbors, and build coalitions, whatever that means to them, because that can mean a lot of different things in practice. when I first moved here, I thought I was just going to be here for a year to do AmeriCorps. And I had a landlord who was walking around with me. I really liked him. And he said something like, you don't want to leave here. You know, you want to build this into a better place. You want to build, interesting things here. Lots of interesting things already existed, but I felt empowered by that. And I was like, yeah, you're right, I do. And I think being civically engaged also lets you see potential in other people. So we were talking about the campaign team. I think investing in your community and meeting other people who are invested allows you to see other people in your circle or in your periphery and say, like, come along with, like, or do you want to come with me, or do you want to learn about this too, or I'm going to this event, do you want to join? And that can be really powerful because that can like change the course of someone's life. I mean, and seriously, you think about that with student orgs. If you have a friend who's like, or an acquaintance, maybe you don't even know them that well, they're like, come along with, or like, I'm going to share this information with you. That can like change how you spend your time. And I think ideally in a really positive way, no matter how long you're in Lexington, you have the ability to think of yourself as a community member within Lexington and within the University of Kentucky. And then you see the reverberations, right? Like if people are putting on like big nasty parties, right? And that's like in your neighborhood and there are residents there, like if you view yourself as a resident and not just like a party goer, that changes how you engage with the environment. So those are some of my thoughts. I don't know, Sally, if you want to share anything about any part of those questions.
I think that when it comes to civic engagement, local government, more so than any other governance, state or federal, is a pretty good reflection, can be a pretty good reflection of the community. But if we don't know you're there, we can't reflect you. So if you aren't talking to us, if you aren't engaging in your neighborhood associations, the fact of the matter is somebody is going to be in our faces at all times. And it's true. And their priorities will become the priorities unless we are given counter priorities, unless we're giving counter positions and counter opinions. Then the people who are most present will be able to set the tone of governance. And it's more than just a vote. I was actually talking to Chris before we even started this, that I remember one summer there was a particular uptick in gun violence, and actually it may have been a particular uptick in murders. And at the same time, we were changing a playground from a wooden structure to a plastic structure. And what City Council heard about the most from more people than you could possibly imagine is the fact that we were changing that structure from wooden to plastic, and not the fact that people were dying at the end of a gun. And so I realized that I'm talking locally, but I'm thinking federally. Firearm legislation happens up there, but if you're not even hearing anything on the local level about gun violence, why would anybody up there take it seriously either, if all we're hearing about is playground structures? And that's a real life example. That is a real life example taken from my life as a legislative aide. Every time I'd open up that email inbox would be one crime report that somebody else got shot, 50 emails from residents that the playground structure should in no terms be plastic. And so we desperately need engagement, that, if there is a sincere concern, if there are sincere issues out there, that is reflected of a broad, diverse community that I know that we have. And one thing I think that the 3rd District has a hard time with is that we're a very different district from other districts. And so a lot of times our needs are counter to what a lot of Lexington needs. One great example that I came across is the fact that by and large, pedestrians in other districts, and we ran the numbers, we got this from our planning department, there's like 3% of the people are pedestrians, 2% of the people are pedestrians, 23% of 3rd District residents are pedestrians in this district. And so if we're going to get better access for pedestrians, bike riders, multimodal transportation, whether it's in the conceptual realm of climate change or whether it's simply you don't want to be hit by a car crossing the street, we have got to get louder because nobody out in the suburbs is going to. And it starts with civic engagement. If I could advise one thing, it would be for every student who lays eyes on this to go tell every other student that they can get a hold of to join your neighborhood association.
Yep.
Live off campus, join your neighborhood association, show up to meetings.
Yes. That's really, really good advice. That's exactly right. And then you can speak to some of the concerns and you can understand the concerns, but you also get to have more of a voice. And then people, because you don't want your neighborhood associations to lump you into a monolith of like students and that be a negative thing. Your council member who loves students, like can't be the only one saying like, no, they're amazing. Like I work with them and they care so much about their community. So I think that there are other ways, and it can be uncomfortable, you know, I mean, you're like in a new space, right? Where people have been meeting like maybe forever. But I think writing in and having accurate information and showing that you care about the issues and advocating for them makes it easier for us to advocate. And some things we have more control of than others. But, you know, and sometimes they're little victories, but it matters, you know, for us to hear from you because then we can say our constituents are telling us.
Yeah, and in addition, piggybacking on what you said about you don't want people lumped in as students, if we are going to take urbanism seriously in this town, we have got to quit lumping people into renters versus owners.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way that we're going to be able to fit in the population that we're expected to be fitting in without a considerable amount of rental property. And this weird artificial division between people who rent and people who own as who has the right to have the voice, right? You hear that a lot. It's never really directly stated. It's kind of innuendo that renters deserve to have less of a voice than owners do. And that is not true. You are all our constituents, right? It doesn't matter whether there's 3 of you renting one apartment or if you are a single person owning a single family home, you should have the same amount of voice. And that's a really important distinction that we need to break down.
That's right.
Thank you so much. I think that was so important. Megan put in the chat box where you can find your local neighborhood association. So make sure to check that out. I want to be mindful of time, and I'm just curious if anyone in the audience, in the Zoom audience, has any questions. Doesn't look like it. Is there anything, Hannah and Sally, that you would like to leave with?
I think that we've talked a lot about involvement and engagement, and whether it's getting involved with a campaign or getting involved with your community, you don't have to have experience to try. I know that it can be intimidating, but the majority of the people who worked on my campaign had never worked on a campaign before, and they were amazing. And so just know that you have skills, maybe you have different resources, maybe you have time. It can be intimidating, but it's worth it to try to learn more because that's going to be a positive thing for you and for people around you, because it makes it easier for them to engage with their communities, to call their legislators, to see something that they want to change and feel like they can. And so that's my encouragement. And it doesn't matter what you major in, you can do this type of work.
How about you, Sally?
I think that if I had to, if I wanted to up the bandwidth of anything that was said here, I think what Hannah was saying about when you step into this role, stepping into it with humility is really important. And I think that's true of any type of role when you find yourself as a community advocate, nonprofit, you know, city council, whatever, being willing to be the person who first sits down at the table and says, okay, I'm not really sure what's going on. So let's just all, you know, get on the same page. Let's catch us up. Let's figure out what we all need to know. So we're all starting from the same amount of information equity. You know, that's bravery. That kind of vulnerability from anybody, that's bravery. And I respect that in a council member. When I see a council member do that, I respect that in a staff member. And I respect that from the public. When somebody's in my inbox saying, here's how I perceive it, what am I missing? You know, that's great. Those options for dialogue are priceless.
Thank you all so much. One final thing, would you be willing to share your contact information for how students can get in contact with you about issues they're concerned about?
Yes, of course. And I'll put it in the chat as well, but my email is HLEGRIS, so my first initial, my last name all together, at lexingtonky.gov.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah.
Yes.
Awesome.
And Sally reads all my emails, so that's the other thing, ultimate information transparency, right?
Thank you all for sharing and for your time. This is a really informative discussion, and I'm hoping it inspires some of our students to not only get involved civically, but possibly to run for office themselves one day.
Yes, and if anybody wants to talk to me about issues or running for office, you know, Chris, I shared this with you, but I want more people to hear earlier, like, you can do this. Like, this is something you can do. You can run for office, you can work in government, you can be a civil servant, you know, you can be a public servant. There's something you can do. So if you're even curious about that, know that I would like to talk to you. So,
thank you all so much. Make sure to also check out lexington.gov and civiclex.gov.